In today's episode, the ownership divide, the renter's tax. You're tuning into Human Architecture Assessment, a structural evaluation of how humans and the systems around us exist and their implications. I'm your host, JAPEXJESS. There's one variable that creates durable, unconditional options. Not income, not network, not education, ownership. Network-based access is real. It has genuine value. The right relationships open doors that money alone can't buy. But network access is always borrowed. It flows downstream from someone else's ownership. Someone in that network had to own the asset for the access to exist at all. You're not accessing the resource, you're accessing their access to it. A friend with a PJ, private jet, is a real resource. As long as the friendship holds, as long as they're available, as long as that dynamic stays intact. Their ownership is what created the access that flows to you, and what they own, they control, including whether you get to use it. Network-based access is contingent. It can be withdrawn. It depends on something outside your control. Ownership doesn't ask permission. It doesn't require maintaining a relationship. It doesn't evaporate when circumstances change. What you own, you control. And control, compounded over time, is what separates people who have permanent options from people who have temporary ones. Specifically, ownership of load-bearing assets. The things that, if you don't own them, someone else controls your access to indefinitely. And that control is never free. It compounds, it expands, and once the system has you dependent, the exit gets harder every year you wait. AI didn't create this dynamic, but AI made it undeniable. Because AI broke the electric bill, and when bills get expensive enough to hurt, people start asking why. And the answer reveals an architecture most people have never looked at directly. But before we go there, I need to complicate the thesis, because own everything is not what I'm saying, and the nuance matters. Not all ownership makes sense. Think about what clothing actually is. It's self-expression. It changes. Fashion cycles fast. What you want to wear in 2 years is not necessarily what you want to wear today. And quality, real quality, costs real money. A $1,000 dress is a different sensory experience than a $50 one. The fabric, the construction, the way it moves, that experience is real. Clothing rental gives you that experience without locking you into it. You wear the $1,000 dress, you feel it, and if you decide you want to own it permanently, the purchase price is dramatically reduced because you've already paid into it. If you don't, return it and experiment with something else. It's one of the reasons why I've rented clothes for almost a decade now. In an industry that changes tides as frequently as fashion does, being selective about what you permanently own is the sophisticated move. The rental model in clothing actually respects the customer. Optionality has genuine value. Flexibility is the feature. Furniture works the same way in specific situations. You're in transition, your permanent pieces haven't arrived, you need a couch, a bed frame, something functional while you wait. Or perhaps you're someone who wants to renovate their space over time, deliberately, without rushing. A rental bridges and solves a real temporary need. Nobody is trying to lock you in forever. The incentive structure is honest. So the thesis isn't own everything. The thesis is own the assets where someone else's control over your access creates indefinite extraction with no exit. Rent where flexibility has genuine value and no dependency is being exploited. The word renting covers both. The structure underneath is completely different. Knowing which is which, that's the literacy. Let's take a look at how the grid actually works. Most people think their electric bill went up because of inflation. General costs rising, everything gets more expensive. That's not the whole story. Utility companies operate on an invest and distribute model. When a utility builds new infrastructure, transmission lines, upgraded capacity, etc., those costs get socialized across all ratepayers. Every customer on the grid shares the cost of whatever the grid needs to build. Also, if you think about when there's like an outage, lines go down, these costs are also included and shared across the grid. And this has always been true. For most of utility history, the infrastructure being built served residential and commercial customers roughly proportionally. The cost distribution was imperfect but defensible. AI broke that balance. Data centers are not ordinary customers. A hyperscale data center can require 500 megawatts or more of dedicated power. That requires dedicated transmission lines, new substations, upgraded power plants, infrastructure that exists specifically to serve that one customer's demand. Under the invest and distribute model, ordinary ratepayers fund that infrastructure. The data center pays its own electricity consumption, but the grid strain it created, that cost gets distributed to you. The numbers are not abstract. A Bloomberg News analysis found wholesale electricity costs as much as 267% more near data center clusters than 5 years ago. Costs passed directly to customers. Data centers consumed 4.4% of U.S. electricity in 2023. U.S. Department of Energy projects that figure reaches 6.7 to 12% by 2028. In the Philadelphia, New Jersey, Maryland grid region, PJM for short, which has since expanded to over 13 states and DC, data centers were responsible for 63% of a $9.3 billion capacity market price increase. Baltimore residents saw bills jump over $17 per month. DC Pepco customers saw $21 per month starting June 2025. That's not inflation. That's your bill being used to build corporate infrastructure you have no ownership stake in and will never profit from. And it's accelerating. In December 2025, PJM failed to procure enough power capacity for the first time in its history, falling short of reliability targets, with data centers accounting for 94% of projected load growth. The grid operator's own market monitor stated, the capacity market will be at maximum price for the foreseeable future, 5 to 10 years. Oregon saw it clearly enough to act. They passed legislation requiring data centers to pay for the actual grid strain they cause, rather than distributing it to ratepayers. That's the exception. Everywhere else, the model holds, and the model is working exactly as designed. If the grid is the extraction system, solar is one of the few functioning exits. A homeowner with solar and battery storage can meaningfully decouple from grid dependency. Not completely, but enough to hedge. Enough that when rates rise, the impact is buffered. Enough that when the grid is strained by the next wave of data center build out, you are less exposed than the person who has no option but to absorb it. The upfront cost is real. The payback period is real, typically 8 to 12 years depending on your market, potentially shortening as rates continue rising. These are not trivial considerations, but the homeowner has the option. The calculation is available to them. They can run the numbers, make the decision, and act on it. The renter cannot. Structurally. Not inconveniently, structurally. They don't own the roof. They cannot install panels. They cannot make the capital investment. They have one option. Pay whatever the utility charges. Forever. With no hedge and no exit. That asymmetry is not accidental. And for those with the structure to use it, an LLC with legitimate business activity can treat solar installation as a capital expenditure. Section 179 allows full cost deduction in the purchase year. The 30% federal investment tax credit applies, and these are the same mechanisms large corporations use, available at the individual level. Find your accountant, understand the tools, use what's available to you. Let's pause and debunk the illusion of ownership, because Home ownership is the exit, but only real home ownership, and not everyone who thinks they own owns. Consider the long-term renter. Same apartment for 30, 40 years. They know every neighbor. They've painted the walls, replaced fixtures, complete remodeling. Wow. Psychologically, it's theirs. Emotionally, it's theirs. Legally, it was never theirs. One day the building sells, new owner raises rent beyond reach, converts to luxury units, hands the property to a developer, or simply decides not to renew the lease. Decades of assumed stability evaporates. The person who thought proximity was ownership discovers it wasn't. Longevity is not ownership. Familiarity is not ownership. Emotional investment is not ownership. Only the deed tells the truth. Then there's the condo owner, who did everything right by conventional standards, bought the unit, paid the mortgage, built equity, assumed they owned something real. What they owned was the interior of a box. The land underneath belongs to someone else. The building structure belongs to someone else. The HOA makes decisions about the property they have limited power to override. When the building gets flagged for redevelopment, when an underlying property gets sold to a developer, when the board votes to dissolve, the unit owner discovers their ownership had a ceiling they never examined. They owned what was inside the walls. Everything that mattered was outside them. And then there's the HOA fee. The bill that never ends. No finish line. No payoff date. With a mortgage, you can eventually satisfy yourself. Right? You pay it down, you own it outright, the bank's claim is gone. The HOA fee has no such exit. It continues after you finish paying your mortgage. It increases when the board decides it increases. You technically have a vote, but you are one voice among many, governed by a structure you didn't design and can't fully control. When you account for HOA fees, condo ownership starts to look like something else entirely. You own the right to rent. You bought the walls, and you're renting everything outside them indefinitely with a monthly invoice to prove it. Like, oh my goodness. You look at some of the apartments in Manhattan, for example, and you might see one condo, 700,000. You say, oh, wow, that's unbelievable. 700? 700? And then you look at the HOA fee. Because let's be real, if that apartment is on the market, there's a reason. There's a reason. And then you look at the HOA fee and see $8,700. $700,000 condo with an $8,700 HOA fee every month. $8,700 for a HOA fee. When will they decide to double it, make it 16? I mean, Jesus. And this forever. That's, oh man, that's wild. That's wild. You see another condo, $500,000. You say, oh, really? That sounds like New Jersey condo apartment prices. What are we talking about? What are we looking at? That one, $2,000 HOA fee. So literally, you are paying for the right to rent. You own the apartment for the right to rent. This isn't hypothetical. Across major cities, older condo buildings are being sold out from under residents who spent decades believing they had security. Elderly owners on fixed incomes, people who sacrificed to buy, people who did what they were told was the responsible thing, displaced because the ownership they had wasn't the ownership they thought they had. The lesson isn't that condo ownership is worthless, it's that ownership has layers, and most people never look past the first one. What do you actually own? What sits above you in the ownership stack? Who has the power to override your claim? These are not abstract legal questions. They are the questions that determine whether your ownership is real or performed. True ownership means owning the asset, the land it sits on, and the decision-making authority over what happens to it. Anything less is a degree of renting, with better paperwork. And then there's a version that plays out publicly. The athlete, the influencer, the person generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. The lifestyle is visible. The wealth looks real, but the wealth was never converted into ownership. It was converted into access. Luxury rentals, leased cars, financed everything. The appearance of ownership with none of the structure underneath it. The income stops, and it always eventually does. The contract ends, the algorithm changes, the brand deal dries up, and everything evaporates because it was never ownership. It was high income renting. What makes this instructive rather than just sad is when the income was there to do it differently. A prominent influencer generating significant monthly income purchases a multi-million-dollar home and finances it. Has the cash, chooses the mortgage anyway. A few years later, income drops, payments can't be sustained, and the home is gone. The cash was there. The choice was the mortgage. Because somewhere along the way, home ownership became synonymous with having a mortgage. The mortgage became the signal of arrival, proof that you qualified, proof that you made it. The financing felt like the sophisticated move even when it wasn't necessary. But a mortgage is nothing more than the bank's claim on your asset until you've paid them back in full with interest over how many ever years. You don't own the home. You're purchasing the right to own it someday, if nothing goes wrong. If you lose your job tomorrow, is your house secure? The people who profit from financing collapse the distinction between ownership and mortgage deliberately. They're not the same word. A mortgage is a financial instrument. Ownership is a state of control. And the difference between the two is the difference between security and exposure, regardless of how much money was coming in when you signed. If you look at the automotive industry, modern vehicles are now experiencing the same model. You bought the car, you own the car, your name on the title. The hardware is physically present. The heated seats, the air conditioning, driver assistance features, you can see them. You paid for them. You don't own the access. BMW tested subscription pricing for heated seats. $18 per month to activate a feature already built into the car you purchased. Heated seats. $18 per month for heated seats? On a vehicle you already own? Heated seats. Hey! No, that's too much. That's too much. My heated seats have not turned off since I sat in my first vehicle. It through winter, summer, it's always on. How much money would I have spent on heated seats in a vehicle equipped like this? Come on now. Crazy, crazy, crazy work. Tesla sold software locked performance upgrades, physical capabilities present in the hardware, access sold separately. And if you look at a lot of these modern vehicles, even the engine is locked. You have some parts in your vehicle you can't even work on yourself because now, one, it either requires specialized tooling that's not available for purchase, and or they actually lock that component. So you have to take it to a dealership. Really? C'est vrai? Really? Wow. Old vehicle, classic, yep. The market's gonna go up for that. Way more with each new modern rent a vehicle, which you pay to own vehicle that comes out. The industry is watching these experiments closely, and the ones that hold become the standard. And this is not a technology story, it's an ownership story. The same architecture that runs utility grid is being applied to vehicles. You think you own the asset. The company retains control over what the asset does. The gap between what you think you own and what you actually own is where the extraction lives. The grid did this first because it had structural monopoly. Utilities are regulated, geography bound, unavoidable. You can't choose not to have electricity. They extracted from that unavoidability for over a century. The vehicle industry looked at that model and saw the direction. AI-enabled software-defined vehicles make it technically trivial to lock features behind subscriptions. The hardware ships, the capability exists, the access is metered. If this is happening to your car's AC, what else is it happening to? What other assets do you think you own where access is actually being held by someone else, and you just haven't noticed the meter yet? Let's be precise about what structural lock-in actually looks like for someone renting. They don't own the housing, rent goes up, they absorb it or they move. They depend on the grid, so as rates go up as data center infrastructure gets socialized across ratepayers, they absorb it. There's no solar option, there is no hedge. They drive a car with software locked features, the subscription expanding. They absorb it or they lose the functionality they thought they purchased. Every extraction system hits them fully, no hedge on any of them. The exits that exist require ownership they don't have. And the direction of travel is deliberate. The fewer people who achieve true ownership, the more people you can lock into these systems indefinitely. Rent extraction, grid extraction, vehicle extraction, all of them require the same precondition, that you don't own the underlying asset. Make true ownership harder to achieve, keep more people in the renter class, and the extraction surface area expands permanently. This is not conspiracy. This is incentive structure. The wealthy understand that renters are reliable and definite revenue. The cultural push toward renting everything, own nothing, subscribe to everything isn't evolution. It's a business model. The numbers reflect the direction. U.S. home ownership peaked at 69.2% in 2004. It now sits at 65%, the lowest since 2019. For people under 35, it's worse, down to 36.4% as of the mid-2025, the lowest in years. The causes are multiple: housing costs, student debt, wage stagnation. The barriers are real. But awareness is the first step. Make it the goal and move. Because the effect of not owning serves the extraction model regardless of cause, and the people designing these systems are not unaware of that alignment. The extraction expanded from the grid to the vehicle, but the surface area doesn't stop there. The mind is the last frontier. The devices you've invited into your home are listening, not metaphorically. I removed my HomePod minis, had like a handful. The settings said listening was off, and yet every time I spoke out loud, the music went low and the device activated. The app showed it as inactive, gaslighting me in real time. Devices I purchased and placed in my home. Crazy work. The model is the same. You think you own the device. The company retains access to what the device observes. The gap between what you think you own and what you actually own. Same architecture, different domain. The mind is the last frontier. The person who sits silently, plans internally, doesn't need external validation, never speaks their intentions out loud, owns something no subscription model has reached yet. No notes to infer from, no shared post, no voice recordings, no data trail, just a mind doing its work in silence. The technology is already being developed to bridge thought directly into action. What the next generation is losing, what it means when the capacity to hold complex private thought is being eroded in plain sight, that's its own conversation. For now, understand that the pattern is consistent. Every frontier of human experience is being mapped, metered, and monetized. The electric meter was just the one you noticed first. Strategic ownership is a form of literacy. And like most forms of real literacy, nobody teaches it directly. You're expected to figure it out, usually after you've already been locked into something that costs you. The framework is not complicated once you see it. Own the load-bearing assets, the ones where dependence is structural, indefinite, and designed to expand. Housing where possible, energy independence where available, the assets where someone else's control over your access compounds against you every year. Rent the flexible assets, where optionality has genuine value, where the category rewards experimentation, where the rental model serves you rather than extracting from you. Clothes that let you experiment with who you're becoming, furniture that bridges the transition, access you genuinely only need temporarily. Know the difference. That's the work. AI made this urgent by making the grid expensive enough to hurt. But the grid was always this way. The car subscription is the grid model expanding. The listening device in your living room is the grid model expanding. The cultural push toward renting everything is the grid model expanding. The exit is ownership, not of everything, of the right things. The people who understand that distinction, who build toward it deliberately, who use the tools available to them, who stay quiet about their plans and do the work, are going to find themselves in a fundamentally different position than those who didn't. The dividing line was always there. AI just made it visible. Now you've seen it. Which side of the line are you working towards? That's it for this episode. And remember, people make excuses for what they want. What do your excuses reveal?